Yes, I realize I'm getting old. You know, reading out my CV is almost as long as my presentation, and thank you for making it short. You know, I really experienced it once in Sri Lanka where I gave a speech that the reading out of the CV was 10 minutes. And yeah, I have to talk about the consequences of the current shifts in international affairs. What is to be meant by current shifts in international affairs? You know, I'm a professor of political science, international relations, and I'm someone who's looking at international relations in a long-term perspective. And when you look back at history of international relations, you will find that every 20, 25 or 35 years, there's a major shift in international relations, tectonic shifts, or major developments which form a new structure. And the last one we went through was in the years 1989, 1990, and the following years. And we are currently also in such a phase where a tectonic shift in the structure of the international relationship and international system is taking part. Unlike 1989, 1990, when all changes were in favor of the West and of the universal values that the West is representing, today things seem to look a little bit different. For instance, from a German perspective in 1990, we were lucky that we were no longer in a situation of strategic competition. The big strategic rivalry or competition we were in, the East-West conflict, was over. When we look at today, we cannot be so certain that this strategic competition is not up again. When we look exactly more in detail, we have basically three strategic challengers in the West. One is Russia. It has at least declared its strategic rivalry to the West at various occasions. And it has done a lot of mainly military thing in the Ukraine, but also now in the Middle East, which are pointing to the fact that Russia is understanding itself as a strategic opponent of the West, not just necessarily an adversary, but something of a rival, an opponent. And if you look at Iran, there's similar pictures. Also, the Iran understands itself not only as the dead enemy of Israel and the US, it's also a strategic competitor to the West. And when we look farther east, we also have China. China is our biggest trading partner in the East. It's the largest trading partner of the US in East Asia. But they are more and more moving towards a position where they are understanding themselves as a strategic rival of the US, of the West in itself. And again, as with the other two countries mentioned, they do it more and more in a military way. Besides this, we have also another structural development. This is the weakening of the West, relatively weakening. I'm not one of those who have views about the decline of the West. I don't think the West is in decline, but the relative strength of the Western community is obvious, both in terms of demography. The Western people are getting less and less, and they're getting older and older, and other peoples in the world are getting more, and they are younger. And there also the economic performance. The West is no longer the economic hub of the world. East Asia is taking over more and more. And there's a relative decline or relative loss of US hegemonic power. And there's an even stronger decline of European power. And there's a growing division among Europeans. You know, one thing that strikes me very much as an European, I've gone through many crises in Europe, that we have currently a crisis over immigration and also over the euro, which is so much dividing the Europeans that I would not be surprised if next year one of the big European countries, Great Britain, was leaving the EU, and others might follow. And also it's a consequence of the demilitarization of European foreign affairs and security policy. We have seen the downgrading of all defense expenditures, not only just in Germany, but in most other countries. Look at France. The French have difficulties in keeping up military options in view of the terrorist attacks. The Brits have difficulties in looking or searching for submarines which are off the coast of Scotland. They don't have no longer any means to hunt submarines there. And this comes along with the Middle East, which is going down the drain to a certain degree. The Middle East political order is unraveling at a degree which was unprecedented so far. This has structural reasons we know for a long time, the inability of Arab societies and other Muslim societies to cope with modernity, the instability of Arab states, to devise political and economic orders which could lead to a transition towards modernity. In particular, we have many cases of state failure, state capture, and corruption. And we have this youth bulge in many or most Arab states, that is, a demographic growth is larger, considerably larger than the economic growth. And this youth bulge produces a lot of angry young men and sometimes women who could fall prey to all kind of political and religious extremism. And there we have also the rise of political Islam. You have many versions of political Islam. Moderate version, we have the radical version, and we have the most radical one, the political Salafism. And the political Islam so far has not turned out to be a track, so to say, to modernization. We all had hoped that in Egypt, for instance, when the Muslim Brotherhood got to power, that they would show a way, how to accommodate tradition, that is religion and modernity, but they failed. So we have more and more radical Islamism and political Salafism. And the Syrian war, civil war, as some has called him, has become a catalyst of the crisis of the Middle East, where the regional crisis and the global shifts are converging. Look at 2011, when the people took to the street in Syria. They wanted help from the West. The West didn't help. The West was not capable or unwilling to force Bashar Assad to stop suppressing his own population by military means. And at the same time, Russia entered the scene by delivering weapons to Assad, to the Assad regime, together with Iran. And the brutality of the Syrian government, supported by Russian and Iranian arms, led to a radicalization of the revolution. And we all know what this means. Today, there are al-Nusra, Islamist militant militias, and the Islamic State, or Daesh, which are more and more, running the scene in Syria, and the conflict is getting worse and worse. During the past 4 years, we have seen the largest increase in the number of jihadist fighters we have ever seen so far. Even during the worst time of the Soviet occupation of Afghanistan, the increase of the number of jihadists has never been so big as it was between 2011 and 2015. And we have seen the first attempt of jihadists to form a statehood, the so-called Islamic State or Caliphate, which is a mixture of jihadists and residues of the former Saddam Hussein regime. What does it mean in terms of common threats and challenges both Germans and Israelis should be aware of? I think, first of all, the societal and political crisis of the Middle East is something that we cannot solve. It's beyond our means, and we should not think that we can solve it. But what we can do is trying to limit the damage and trying to hedge against catastrophic outcomes. And catastrophic outcome, I mean really apocalyptic outcomes. Let me first talk about damage limitation and doing small steps. I think what we should try is to avoid certain things. First of all, that the interference of regional conflicts and strategic conflict are aggravating the already bloody conflict in Syria. And what I mean by this is when you look at what just happened yesterday in Syria, it was continue to happen. That is, there are competing military interventions, competing interests by Russia, by Turkey, by the US, by France, by others. and it involves the danger that there are military exchanges. That is looking for de-escalation. I think it's important, but also to differentiate strategy vis-a-vis Russia. You know, in Germany, we have the discussion, is Russia now on its way towards mending fences with the West because they are, they are fighting IS. You know, when you look what our foreign minister has said in this regard and our vice chancellor, you see a big optimism. I'm rather pessimistic or skeptic in this regard. So far, I've seen Russia only fighting the non-IS militias, as it was the case yesterday. They were fighting Turkmens, but not the Daesh, and they got a response by the Turks for this. So I think we have to look very differentiated on what Russia is doing. So far, they are leading a propaganda campaign. They're trying to sell us that they are fighting IS, but as long as there's no evidence, I don't believe it. But in any case, this has to be pursued on a diplomatic way. There are also the Vienna talks, talks where Germany is part of, where we try, or where Germany tries to bring to the table Russians, Syrians, and the non-Salafist opposition, that is the Free Syrian Army and other groups. And whether this will be a successful campaign, I don't know. The idea is that there will be a armistice between the Syrian government and the Free Syrian Army, and that then there should be elections. I don't know how these elections should look like, and during this part of new elections, a new regime should be established. But these are extremely difficult negotiations. I hope they will come to a success, but they won't end the fight in Syria. They would simply rearrange a little bit the fronts. That is, it would be not a multiple front, but somewhat more direct front. But given the fact that the troops of Bashar Assad have been much more cruel than ISIS so far, I'm not so optimistic whether this will come out in this way. Secondly, we have to learn how to cope with terrorist attacks coming from various Islamist groups, in particular the Islamic State. And I think there's a lot that we can learn from Israel. We in Germany are not totally, but we are more or less unprepared in coping with terrorist threats that you are used to, and where you have been very successful, relatively successful. That also could mean a new dimension of intelligence cooperation. Thirdly, we have to work together in avoiding that Palestinians in the West Bank and East Jerusalem are falling back into violent behavior. I think this is something that goes really to the heart of your concerns. And I hope that we in Germany can do something in order to let this happen. And we also, I think, but this is more something Germany could do, or the Europeans, try to support those countries in the Middle East which are not on the way towards catastrophe. I mean, Tunisia, Morocco, Jordanian. These are countries where I think it would pay well off if we try to support them, to try to help them to find a regular way. Another point is hedging against catastrophic or catalytic outcomes. I think the most important thing that really is something that you are much interested in too is preventing the nuclearization of Iran. And in Germany, and I must say I also agree with this, is the prevailing opinion that the P5+1 plus Iran agreement from spring of this year is an important step in containing or curbing the nuclear ambitions of the Iran. It does not end the strategic hostility of Iran, neither towards Israel, nor towards major parts of the Arabic world, nor against the West. So we have to be very cautious that this agreement is not being violated by Iran, but I don't think it makes sense anymore to fight this agreement. Yeah, I think this agreement is now effect, and we should all work together that this will be effective. And the second big catalytic thing is we should prevent the permanent existence and consolidation of the Islamic State. The longer this state is in existence, and the longer it can consolidate itself, it will be stronger in its terrorist activities. It can upgrade the level of terrorist activities, and this is something we have to address. I don't have any recipe how to do this. You know, there are many people who say, make a big military intervention, yeah, but who should make this intervention? I don't see any force in Europe or in the Middle East who are ready to do this big attack against this caliphate. What we are doing now, or what others are doing now, is flying air sorties, which are weakening the Islamic State, but on the other hand also contribute to that they are closing the ranks with the people they are ruling over. Yeah, this is the danger of, in particular, if you're doing World War II kind of attacks in this region, this is not very well taken. So I don't have a solution, but this is something we have to talk on, and we have to discuss what can be done in order to destroy the Islamic State. And by destruction, I mean really destruction, not just a superficial destruction. And this is, I think, one of the main tasks in the coming years. Otherwise, we won't recognize the Middle East in a couple of years. Thank you for listening, and I would give her, thank you, and I will stay.